The movie begins in space with the spaceship Avalon traveling to the colony world of Homestead Dio, while the inhabitants of Earth are fleeing in large numbers. The 5,000 passengers and the crew will spend the entire 120-year journey in hibernation pods. The trip has been ongoing for 30 years. Power is diverted to the forward shields as the ship travels through a meteor storm. When a ship collides with a large meteor, the power blinks, red alert screens appear in the control area, and everything quickly returns to normal. Something terrible has occurred. Mechanical engineer Jim Preston awakens in his pod to a cheerful computer voice, informing him that they will soon arrive at Homestead Dio, and that it is typical to feel weak and bewildered after being in hibernation. The computer directs him to his cabin, where he sleeps, after scanning the wristband on his arm. The following morning, he gets out of bed, mulls over what to wear to meet other travelers, and walks into a cafeteria by himself. He attends a colonist orientation session on Homestead, but he is the only one present. The jovial computer-generated instructor is baffled by his query as to why none else is present. When Jim visits the main concourse, the information kiosk is unable to assist him. He locates a place of business from which he may communicate with the Homestead Company, but is forewarned that doing so will be costly. When he sends a message asking for assistance, because he is the only one awake, he learns that it will take 15 years for anyone on Earth to receive it. He is by himself. Jim discovers all of the ship's equipment manuals. He reads through the instructions for the hibernation pods, but is unable to figure out how to restart it after the person has woken up. He is unable to enter the command area or the area where the crew pods are located to try and wake up someone for assistance. He does not have the necessary clearance because of his wristband. However, the robot is programmed to give bartender advice, such as if you don't like where you are, change things. Jim eventually finds the robot bartender Arthur, with whom he can communicate. Jim travels in general class, which has a more basic cabin, and upgrades to a suite, which has nicer amenities. Jim uses the ship's entertainment options for a year, but without any other people, he grows increasingly lonely. He proceeds to a location where people can don spacesuits and leave the ship while still being securely linked to it. Without a spacesuit, Jim considers opening the airlock to commit himself, but stops himself and enters the pod area instead. He stumbles across a pod that contains Aurora, a stunning woman. He checks out the passenger list she had created before the ship sailed. She is a journalist who is visiting Homestead to have an experience and discover the motivations behind colonists. He thinks she is perfect because he reads her novels. After a year alone, he struggles with whether to wake her up, even though doing so will condemn her to die on the ship. However, he can no longer bear the loneliness, so he uses her pod to manually wake her up while hiding so that she cannot see him. Aurora is awakened by the same upbeat computer program and directed to her cabin where she will sleep. The following morning, Aurora awakens by herself and travels to the main concourse, where she runs into Jim. He is honest with her about how long he has been awake, but he is silent about waking her up. The robot bartender, Arthur, has agreed to his request not to inform Aurora what he has done. Every day, Aurora and Jim talk about potential fixes for the pods. While swimming, running, and starting her story, she asks Jim why he left Earth, and he replies that he likes to make and fix things, and on Earth, when something breaks and isn't fixed, it gets replaced. He desires to live in a home that he constructs himself. She intended to travel to the colony, spend a year there interviewing colonists about their motivations for leaving Earth, and then return to the planet. His standard clearance does not allow him to receive the elaborate breakfast that Aurora, a gold-class passenger, can order for him. After some time of getting to know one another, Aurora agrees to Jim's invitation to go on a date. Following their meal, he leads her to the room with the spacesuits, where there are 2 suits. They both put on their suits and leave the room. Aurora is happy to be back inside, so they head to Jim's cabin and make out. They enjoy their schedule of exercising, stargazing, and using the dining and entertainment options provided by the ship. When Aurora's birthday rolls around the following year, Jim organizes a unique surprise for her by making a ring. Jim agrees as Aurora walks into the bar and tells Arthur that she have no secrets. Jim is unaware that Arthur will understand this to indicate that Jim has admitted to telling Aurora that he woke her up. Arthur tells Aurora what a wise decision it was for Jim to choose her as the person to wake her up as Jim enters the men's room. Jim is warned not to approach Aurora by the distraught and enraged woman. One night, as he is sleeping, she breaks into his cabin and beats him with her fists. Jim tries to explain himself over a ship's intercom while Aurora is running, but she yells that he killed her. The control room is getting notifications of system failures more frequently and more frequently over time, while all of this is happening. Little things like the cleaning robots experiencing system failures are things Jim and Aurora have observed. The meteor crash occurred 2 years ago. Gus, a deck crew chief who has woken up early, shows up on the concourse one day. He explains that something very serious is wrong because hibernation pods have never failed before. They access the command center using his wristband and discover that the ship's automatic diagnostics have failed, necessitating a human inspection of each deck. There is a significant gravity failure and Aurora nearly drowns in the pool, while Gus conducts experiments prior to this being possible. Gus passes out this moment, and Jim and Aurora take him to the hospital where they place him in a medical auto-diagnostic scanner. His entire body is covered with necrosis, and the failing hibernation pod has made death inevitable. He dons his uniform and gets ready to pass away while also giving Jim and Aurora his wristband so they can enter the regions of the ship where they need to go in order to make repairs. Jim and Aurora discover a meteorite-made hole in engineering that cuts through some crucial regions. When they open one door, Aurora is almost pulled out due to a hole through the hull. Jim pushes a tablet to her, and she blocks the hole with it. Jim then further seals the hole with a liquid sealant. They discover that the fusion engine exhaust needs to be manually evacuated after the space becomes pressurized. The manual override won't work. Jim has to get into a spacesuit and walk outside to fix it. He ends up needing to go into the exhaust channel to open a flap, but it won't stay open unless Jim holds it open so that the manual vent will work. Aurora, now frantic not to lose Jim, pleads with him over the radio, but she pulls the lever. Jim is pushed away, his tether snaps, and his suit is damaged. He tells Aurora farewell. She rushes to don a spacesuit before going in search of him. Jim is retrieved by her snagging his leash, but when they enter, he is not awake. She pulls him to the infirmary, and the autodoc confirms Jim is dead. Gus' wristband and override code are used by Aurora to successfully command the machine to revive Jim. He is alive, and she feels relieved and thrilled. Later, everything aboard the ship has returned to normal. Jim is working on the autodoc and informs Aurora that he discovered a way to rehibernate her in the hospital using the command override, but he would be returning on his own. Jim and Aurora decide to establish a life together on the ship while they remain awake. After 88 years, a huge tree, a lot of trailing vines and vegetation, birds flying in a cabin, which might contain Jim and Aurora's grandchildren, are all visible on the Grand Concourse when the captain and crew wake up at the end of the voyage. Aurora's voiceover is reading her story to the passengers and explaining how they made a good life where they were.